Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his assigned Veltar warship, watching the star charts as his fleet moved through hyperspace toward the last known location of the Void Serpent. The alien ship felt strange under his feet, with its curved walls and organic-looking control systems that seemed to grow from the floor rather than being built on top of it. Dr. Wong was studying sensor readings while Lieutenant Carter worked with the Veltar Communications officer to coordinate with the other ships in their small fleet. The Veltar captain assigned to Jake's ship was named Coulson, a middle-aged warrior with steady silver light patterns, who seemed genuinely curious about human tactical methods. Through Amy's translation, he had been asking Jake questions about Earth's military history and how humans approached unknown threats. Captain Morrison, Coulson said as they dropped out of hyperspace near the troubled trade route, "Our sensors show debris from the latest attack. The Void Serpent struck again just 6 hours ago." Jake studied the tactical display, showing scattered pieces of what had once been a cargo vessel. The destruction was complete, with no signs of survivors. Whatever this creature was, it possessed tremendous destructive power. Any pattern to the attacks? Jake asked. Dr. Wong looked up from her analysis station. "Captain, I've been studying all the attack reports. The Void Serpent seems to target ships that are traveling alone or in small groups. It avoids heavily armed convoys, but strikes fast at vulnerable vessels." Lieutenant Carter added her own observations. "The creature also seems to prefer attacking near asteroid fields or nebulae, where it can use natural cover to hide its approach." Jake nodded, filing away this information as he developed his strategy. Through the communication system, he could hear General Vexstar coordinating with his own fleet. The general's approach was straightforward and aggressive: spread out in a wide search pattern and attack the creature with overwhelming firepower when found. General Vexstar's plan follows traditional Veltar hunting tactics, Captain Coulson explained. Surround the prey, cut off escape routes, and destroy it quickly before it can cause more damage. Jake understood the logic, but something about the situation bothered him. The reports described a creature of enormous size and power, yet it only attacked defenseless ships. Why would such a powerful being avoid real fights with military vessels? "Dr. Wong, what do we know about Void Serpent biology and behavior?" Lisa consulted her tablet, which now contained everything the Veltar archives could tell them about these rare creatures. "They're incredibly ancient, Captain. Some records suggest they've existed for millions of years. They're not really serpents at all, but more like living ships that can manipulate space-time to travel faster than light without using conventional hyperspace technology." Jake felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. "What about reproduction? Do they have young?" Dr. Wong's eyes widened as she realized what Jake was thinking. The records mention that Void Serpents are extremely protective of their offspring. "Oh my God, Captain, what if this isn't random aggression? What if it's a parent protecting its young?" The idea changed everything about how Jake viewed the situation. Instead of a mindless monster terrorizing space lanes, they might be dealing with an intelligent being defending its family. He opened a communication channel to his small fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison. I want to change our search pattern. Instead of hunting for the creature itself, we're going to look for signs of Void Serpent nesting activity." The response from General Vexstar was immediate and angry. "Human, you are not in command of this mission. We will follow proven tactics, not your alien theories." But Jake had already begun implementing his plan with his own ships. Instead of spreading out to hunt, they moved together toward the largest asteroid field in the area, using sensors to look for energy signatures that might indicate a nest or young creatures. It took 4 hours of careful searching before they found what Jake was looking for. Hidden deep within the asteroid field was a massive cavern carved into the largest asteroid. The cavern was filled with a strange energy that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Captain, I'm reading 3 smaller void serpents inside that cavern," reported the sensor operator. "They appear to be juveniles, much smaller than the adult creature that's been attacking ships." Jake studied the readings carefully. The young creatures were indeed much smaller, but they were still the size of large shuttles. More importantly, they seemed to be in some kind of distress, with erratic energy patterns that suggested illness or injury. "Dr. Wong, could the solar storm activity in this region be affecting the young void serpents?" Lisa ran quick calculations on her tablet. "It's possible, Captain. If they're sensitive to certain types of radiation, the increased solar activity could be making them sick. That would explain why the parent is so aggressive. It's trying to protect sick children." Suddenly, the massive adult void serpent materialized out of hyperspace, directly between Jake's fleet and the asteroid containing its young. The creature was even larger than the reports had suggested, easily the size of a Veltar battleship, with a body that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Energy crackled along its surface, and Jake could see weapons charging for attack. General Vextar's fleet arrived at the same moment, weapons armed and ready to engage. "All ships, attack pattern 7. Target the creature's energy core and disable it quickly." But Jake made a different choice. "Hold your fire," he ordered his ships. "Do not attack unless the creature strikes first." Instead of attacking, Jake had his ship move slowly toward the creature, with all weapons powered down. It was an enormous risk, but he hoped his theory about parental protection was correct. The void serpent paused, its energy weapons still charged, but not firing. Jake could sense its uncertainty as it tried to understand why these ships were not attacking. "Amy, can you modify our communication system to broadcast on multiple frequencies? I want to try something." Lieutenant Carter worked quickly to reconfigure. "Their transmitters. Ready, Captain? What do you want to broadcast?" Jake took a deep breath and activated the communication system. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth to the Void Serpent. We are not here to harm you or your young. We believe your children are sick from solar radiation, and we want to help." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's energy patterns began to change, shifting from aggressive red to curious blue and purple. It was clearly intelligent and had understood at least the intent behind Jake's message that Dr. Wong had been analyzing. The energy readings from the juvenile creatures. "Captain, I think I know what's wrong with them. The solar radiation is interfering with their natural energy absorption processes. They're essentially starving, even though they're surrounded by energy sources." Jake made another risky decision. "Broadcast our medical scanner data to the creature. Show it that we understand the problem." As the data transmission was sent, the adult void serpent's behavior changed dramatically. Its aggressive posture relaxed, and it began projecting complex energy patterns that seemed almost like language. Unfortunately, General Vegstar chose that moment to attack. His fleet opened fire on the creature, claiming that Jake's hesitation was allowing it to escape. The massive being roared in pain and anger as energy beams struck its hull, and it immediately began fighting back with devastating force. The battle was fierce, but brief. The Void Serpent's natural weapons were incredibly powerful, and within minutes, 2 of the general's ships were disabled and drifting. Vextar's own flagship was badly damaged and losing power rapidly. Jake faced the most important decision of the entire trial. He could use this opportunity to eliminate his rival by allowing the creature to destroy the general's ship, or he could try to save lives and continue his attempt at peaceful contact. "All ships move to assist General Vextar's fleet," Jake ordered. "Use minimum force to distract the creature, but do not attack unless absolutely necessary to save lives." His small fleet moved between the Void Serpent and the disabled ships, providing cover while rescue operations began. Jake continued broadcasting peaceful intentions while his ships pulled survivors from the damaged vessels. The Void Serpent seemed to understand what was happening. Instead of pressing its attack, it withdrew to a defensive position near the asteroid containing its young. Watching Jake's fleet with what appeared to be cautious respect, Dr. Wong had been working on a solution to help the sick juveniles. "Captain, I think we can create an energy converter that would filter out the harmful radiation while allowing the young creatures to feed properly. It would take several hours to construct and calibrate, but it could save their lives." Jake opened a communication channel to all ships in the area, including the badly damaged vessels from General Vextar's fleet. "This is Captain Morrison to all forces. I'm proposing a temporary ceasefire while we attempt to help the Void Serpent's offspring. This creature is not a mindless monster. It's a parent protecting sick children." The response was immediate and mixed. Some captains expressed skepticism, others showed interest, and General Vextar himself roared with outrage at what he saw as weakness and foolishness. But as Jake's team began constructing the energy converter, the second trial took place in the Imperial Council Chamber, a circular room with high walls covered in star maps and tactical displays. Jake sat at a table with the other remaining competitors, facing a panel of the Empire's most senior advisors. Emperor Kethmorin observed from his throne, while Princess Zarathil stood nearby, her light patterns shifting with what Jake was beginning to recognize as intense concentration. High Advisor Mel Wynn, an ancient Veltar with silver light patterns, moving slowly under his weathered skin, presented the scenario. Through Amy's translation, Jake learned that a colony world called Kethmanir was facing a catastrophic crisis. A massive solar storm had destroyed most of the planet's power grid and food production systems. The colony had 3 million inhabitants, and only enough emergency supplies to last 2 months. Each competitor must present a complete plan to save the colony, Melwin explained. "You have access to all Imperial resources, but you must justify every decision. The Empire's military, economic, and technological capabilities are at your disposal, but remember that other worlds also have needs that cannot be ignored." General Vextar went first, presenting his solution with military precision. His plan involved immediate deployment of the Imperial fleet to establish order and prevent panic. He would implement strict rationing enforced by martial law, conscript the strongest colonists into workgangs to rebuild infrastructure, and relocate the weakest inhabitants to other worlds to reduce the burden on resources. "Efficiency is the key to survival," the general declared. "Sentiment and individual preferences must be set aside for the greater good. Strong leadership requires making hard choices that others cannot make." The panel of advisors nodded with approval. Jake could see that this was exactly the kind of decisive military thinking that the Veltar traditionally valued. The first noble competitor proposed a similar but less harsh approach, focusing on technological solutions and emergency aid shipments. His plan was practical, but showed little innovation beyond standard Imperial emergency procedures. Then it was Jake's turn. He had spent hours the night before discussing ideas with his team, drawing on human experience with disaster relief and crisis management. Dr. Wong had provided valuable insights about resource allocation, while Lieutenant Carter had helped him understand the political complexities of managing a diverse population during emergencies. "Honored advisors," Jake began in his careful Veltar pronunciation, "I propose a different approach based on cooperation rather than control." He stood and moved to the tactical display, using gestures Amy had taught him to show respect while presenting his ideas. "Rather than imposing martial law, I suggest creating volunteer coordination councils from the colonists themselves. People work harder when they choose to help rather than when they are forced." Jake outlined his plan step by step. "Instead of Conscripting workers, he would establish skills-based volunteer groups that could organize themselves efficiently. Rather than relocating the weak, he would use their knowledge and experience to support the work teams. Instead of strict rationing enforced by soldiers, he would implement community-managed distribution systems that could adapt to local needs. The key is to make every person feel valuable and involved, Jake explained. When people believe they have a voice in their survival, they will work miracles. Fear and force may bring quick results, but cooperation and hope will create lasting solutions. Most importantly, Jake proposed establishing inter-clan cooperation networks. The Veltar colony was made up of different family groups that had historically competed with each other. Jake suggested using the crisis as an opportunity to break down these barriers and create new partnerships that would make the colony stronger in the future. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from giving orders, but from bringing different people together to solve problems they could not handle alone. Jake concluded. The silence in the chamber stretched uncomfortably long. Jake could see General Vextar's light patterns flashing with what looked like contempt. Several advisors seemed puzzled by Jake's unconventional approach, but High Advisor Mel Wynn leaned forward with interest. Captain Morrison, your plan is certainly unusual. But tell me, what happens if the colonists refuse to cooperate? What if some groups decide to hoard resources or abandon their responsibilities? Jake had anticipated this question. Then we use human techniques for building trust and resolving conflicts. We create small successes that prove cooperation works better than competition. We show rather than tell. And if some groups still refuse to participate, we make sure the benefits of cooperation are so obvious that social pressure from their neighbors encourages them to join. Princess Zarathiel stepped forward from her position near her father's throne. Captain Morrison, may I ask you a question? Jake bowed respectfully. Of course, Your Highness. You speak of cooperation and voluntary participation, but these are not traditional Veltar concepts. How do you know such methods would work with our people? Jake considered his answer carefully. Your Highness, I have observed that the Veltar people show great loyalty to their families and clans. This suggests they understand the value of working together when they share common goals. My plan simply expands that natural cooperation to include the entire colony. The princess's light patterns shifted to bright gold, which Jake had learned indicated approval or interest. That is an interesting observation. Please continue. Jake felt more confident as he explained the psychological and practical benefits of his approach. He talked about how crisis could either divide communities or bring them together, and how leadership could influence which outcome occurred. He described human examples of disaster recovery where cooperation had achieved better results than authoritarian control. When the presentations were finished, the advisors deliberated for over an hour. Jake waited nervously with the other competitors in an adjoining chamber. General Vextar ignored him completely, but Jake noticed the remaining noble competitors studying him with curious glances. Finally, they were called back to hear the results. High Advisor Mel Wynn announced that all three plans had merit, but Jake's approach had impressed the panel with its innovation and understanding of Veltar social structures. Captain Morrison passes the second trial, Mel Wynn declared. His plan showed wisdom beyond his years, an insight into our people that was unexpected from an outsider. General Vextar's light patterns flashed angry red, but he maintained his composure. Jake could see that the competition was becoming personal for the Veltar military leader. That evening brought unexpected news. A real crisis had developed that required immediate attention. Reports came in that a massive space creature had been attacking ships along one of the Empire's most important trade routes. The creature was described as larger than a battleship, with the ability to appear suddenly from hyperspace and disable vessels with some kind of energy. Weapon Emperor Kethmorin announced that the third trial would involve dealing with this actual threat, rather than a theoretical scenario. Each remaining competitor would lead a small fleet to track down and neutralize the creature known as a Void Serpent. This will be the ultimate test, the Emperor declared. You must demonstrate not only tactical skill, but also the judgment needed to protect the Empire's interests while minimizing losses. Jake felt his stomach tighten with worry. Leading alien ships against an unknown creature was far beyond anything he had prepared for. Dr. Wong immediately began researching everything available about Void Serpents, while Lieutenant Carter worked to understand the command systems of Veltar vessels. Princess Zarathiel visited Jake's quarters again that night, but this time she seemed troubled rather than curious. Captain Morrison, I must warn you about something. General Vextar has been speaking privately with some of Bethel, the fleet commanders assigned to tomorrow's mission. I believe he may try to use this trial to eliminate you permanently. Jake was not entirely surprised by this news. What exactly are you suggesting, Your Highness? Space is vast and dangerous, she replied. If your ship were to suffer an unfortunate accident during the hunt, or if you were to become separated from the fleet and lost, it would be seen as a tragic consequence of the trial, rather than deliberate action. Jake appreciated the warning, but he was more interested in her reasons for giving it. Why are you telling me this? Wouldn't it be simpler for you if I just disappeared? Princess Zarathiel's light patterns shifted through several colors before, settling on a deep purple that Jake had not seen before. Captain Morrison, over the past few days, I have learned much about human concepts of choice and individual worth. I find these ideas fascinating. But more than that, I have come to respect your character and your different way of thinking. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I do not know if I could ever truly love someone chosen for me through ancient trials and political necessity. But I have begun to believe that you might be the kind of person I could choose to work beside as an equal partner. Jake felt a strange mixture of honor and responsibility at her words. Your Highness, I want you to know that regardless of how these trials end, I have great respect for you as a leader and as a person. If we do end up... Jake Morrison spent his first night on Veltar Prime in a luxurious guest suite within the Imperial Palace, but sleep did not come easily. He stared at the ceiling, which was made of some kind of crystal that glowed softly with shifting patterns of light. Tomorrow would bring the first of 3 trials that would determine whether he could marry Princess Zarathiel and avoid a diplomatic disaster that could lead to war. Dr. Lisa Wong had spent the entire evening researching Veltar marriage customs in the palace library, aided by helpful scholars who seemed fascinated by the situation. She knocked on Jake's door early in the morning with a tablet full of information. Captain, I've learned more about what you're facing, she said as she entered his room. The 3 trials are traditional tests that have been used for thousands of years. The first trial tests combat skill and bravery. The second tests wisdom and leadership. The third trial is the most mysterious. They call it the trial of sacrifice, but no one would tell me exactly what it involves. Jake sat up and rubbed his tired eyes. What about the other competitors? How many am I facing? 3 others besides General Vextar, Lisa replied. 2 are minor nobles from distant colonies, but General Vestar is the real threat. He's won dozens of battles for the Empire and is considered one of their finest warriors. The Veltar respect, strength above almost everything else. Lieutenant Amy Carter joined them for breakfast, looking worried. Captain, I've been monitoring communications from Earth. Command wants to know what's happening, but I haven't told them about the marriage situation yet. How do I explain this? Jake almost smiled despite his stress. Tell them we're engaged in complex cultural negotiations that require my personal participation. it's technically true. Sergeant Ben Taylor appeared in the doorway, fully armed and ready for action. Captain, palace guards are here to escort you to the first trial. They say it begins in 1 hour. The arena where the combat trial would take place was enormous, carved into the ground like a giant owl with thousands of seats rising up the sides. Jake estimated that at least 50,000 Veltar had come to watch the competition. The noise was incredible as they cheered and called out in their musical language. Emperor Kethmorn sat in a special box overlooking the arena floor, with Princess Zerathil beside him. Jake could see her light patterns even from a distance, shifting between gold and purple as she watched the preparations below. A Veltar official explained the rules through Amy's translation. Each competitor would face 3 champions in single combat using traditional Veltar weapons. The weapons were long curved blades that could extend or retract at the user's will, making them unpredictable and dangerous. Jake was given practice time with the weapon, but it felt awkward in his human hands. The Veltar had longer arms and different muscle structure that made the blades balance perfect for them, but challenging for him. General Vextar went first, and Jake watched carefully to learn what he could. The general was impressive, moving with fluid grace as he defeated each champion quickly and efficiently. His technique was flawless, and the crowd roared approval as he finished his third opponent. The 2 noble competitors followed, both showing skill but lacking the general's natural talent. One managed to defeat all 3 champions, but was badly wounded in the process. The other lost his second match and was eliminated from the competition. Then it was Jake's turn. He walked onto the arena floor, carrying the unfamiliar weapon, knowing that 50,000 aliens were watching his every move. His first opponent was a large Veltar warrior with scars covering his arms and bright red light patterns that suggested aggression. The Veltar fighting style relied on fluid movements, and the weapon's ability to change length during combat. Jake quickly realized he could not match his opponent's natural grace or familiarity with the weapon. Instead, he would have to use different tactics. When the match began, Jake deliberately stumbled and appeared clumsy with his weapon. His opponent, thinking the human was incompetent, became overconfident and began showing off for the crowd. Jake waited for the right moment, then suddenly changed his fighting style to the close-quarters combat techniques he had learned in the Space Marines. The Veltar warrior was not prepared for Jake's sudden shift to aggressive, unpredictable movements. Jake managed to disarm his opponent and win the match through surprise rather than superior skill. The crowd was silent for a moment, then began cheering with what sounded like appreciation for the unexpected victory. His second opponent had watched the first match and was more cautious. This warrior kept his distance and used the weapon's extending ability to attack from long range. Jake found himself being forced backward around the arena as his opponent pressed the advantage. Jake noticed that the arena floor was not perfectly smooth, but had small drains and raised areas designed to channel away water when the space was cleaned. He began maneuvering his opponent toward one of these areas, pretending to retreat in panic. When the Veltar warrior stepped on the slightly raised drain cover, Jake suddenly charged forward. The uneven footing caused his opponent to lose balance. For just a moment, but it was enough. Jake managed to land a decisive blow and win his second match. The third opponent was the most skilled of all, a former champion who moved like liquid lightning. Jake knew he had no chance of winning through conventional fighting or trickery. This warrior was too experienced to fall for the tactics that had worked before. The match went on much longer than the others, with Jake barely managing to avoid his opponent's attacks. He was bleeding from several small cuts, and his strength was fading fast. The crowd was on its feet, sensing that the human was about to be defeated. Then Jake did something completely unexpected. Instead of continuing to fight, he suddenly stopped and lowered his weapon. His opponent paused, confused by this behavior. "You have already won," Jake said loudly in his careful Veltar pronunciation. "You are the better warrior." "I yield to your skill." The arena fell completely silent. The Veltar warrior looked uncertain, his weapon still raised. In the royal box, Princess Zarathiel had risen from her seat, her light patterns flashing with what looked like surprise. Jake continued, speaking in Veltar, "But I ask for mercy, not for myself, but so that I may continue to serve in the other trials. I believe there are different kinds of strength, and perhaps combat skill is not the only way to serve the Empire." The champion looked toward the royal box for guidance. Emperor Kethmorin stood and spoke in a voice that carried throughout the arena. Amy translated quickly for Jake's team. "He says that showing mercy to a worthy opponent is itself a form of strength. The champion may choose whether to accept the human's yield or continue the fight." The Veltar champion studied Jake for a long moment, then slowly lowered his weapon. He spoke a few words that Amy translated as, "I accept your yield. Brave human, you have shown honor in defeat." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Jake was not sure if he had won or lost the trial. He looked up at the royal box and saw Princess Zarathiel watching him with what might have been approval in her large dark eyes. Emperor Kethmorin announced the results. Jake had won 2 matches and shown honor in the third, which was enough to pass the first trial. General Vextar looked angry as he realized the human would continue to compete. That evening, Princess Zarathiel surprised Jake by visiting his quarters. She was accompanied by 2 guards, but seemed relaxed and curious rather than formal. "That was an interesting performance today," she said in her accented English. Most Veltar would have fought to the death rather than yield. Jake was unsure how to respond. "Your Highness, I'm not trying to insult your customs. I just believe that sometimes wisdom is knowing when not to fight." The princess tilted her head in that curious gesture he had noticed before. "Tell me about your world, Captain Morrison. What is it like to live on a planet where individual choice matters more than ancient traditions?" Jake found himself talking about Earth's history, about democracy and human rights, about the long struggle to build societies based on equality rather than conquest. Princess Zarathiel listened with intense interest, asking questions that showed she had been thinking about these concepts. "On Veltar Prime, the Emperor's word is law," she said. "But sometimes I wonder if our old ways are the best ways. Your people seem to have found different answers to the same problems we face." When she left, Jake realized that the princess was more than just a prize to be won in competition. She was an intelligent person struggling with the same questions about leadership and responsibility that he faced every day as a military officer. Dr. Wong knocked on his door as he was preparing for sleep. "Captain, I've learned more about the second trial. Tomorrow, you'll face a complex leadership scenario. You'll need to solve a crisis involving resource allocation during a planetary emergency. It's designed to test not just intelligence, but the kind of judgment needed to rule an empire." Jake nodded. He had passed the first trial through unconventional thinking and a willingness to show mercy. Tomorrow would require different skills, but he was beginning to understand that the Veltar trials were about more than just finding the strongest warrior. They were. Captain Jake Morrison adjusted his dress uniform one last time as he looked out the viewport of the USS Liberty at the massive alien world below. The planet looked like a blue and silver marble hanging in space, with 3 small moons orbiting around it. He had seen many worlds during his 12 years in the Space Marines, but none quite like this one. This was Veltar Prime, home to one of the most powerful alien empires humanity had ever encountered. "Captain, we're receiving docking instructions." From the surface, Lieutenant Amy Carter called from her station. She was the ship's communications officer and had spent months learning the Veltar language. Her fingers moved quickly over the translation computer as alien symbols appeared on her screen. "Good work, Carter," Jake said. He turned to face his small team. Besides Amy, he had brought Dr. Lisa Wong, a xenobiologist who specialized in alien cultures, and Sergeant Ben Taylor, his most trusted weapons specialist. It wasn't a large group, but Earth's leaders had wanted to keep the first official diplomatic mission small and non-threatening. "Remember, everyone, this meeting could change everything for Earth," Jake said. "The Veltar control trade routes through half the galaxy. If we can make friends with them, we might finally have a real place among the star-traveling species." Dr. Wong looked up from her tablet, where she had been reading notes about Veltar customs. "Captain, I need to remind you again about their greeting rituals. The Veltar place great importance on showing respect to their leaders. When we meet the Emperor, we must bow exactly 3 times, no more, no less. And remember, never make direct eye contact until he speaks first." Jake nodded. He had memorized these rules weeks ago, but he appreciated Lisa's careful attention to detail. One wrong move could ruin everything. The USS Liberty shuddered slightly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, Jake could see enormous crystal spires rising from the surface like frozen lightning. The Veltar cities were unlike anything humans had built, all curves and flowing lines that seemed to grow from the ground itself. "Docking in 5 minutes, Captain," called the pilot from the front of the ship. Jake felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. He had fought in 3 different wars and led dozens of dangerous missions, but this felt different. In combat, you knew who your enemies were. Here, one wrong word could make an entire alien empire into humanity's enemy. The ship touched down with barely a bump. Jake could hear the docking clamps engaging and the hiss of air pressure equalizing. A few minutes later, a delegation of Veltar officials boarded the ship to escort them to the palace. Jake's first sight of the aliens up close was startling. The Veltar were tall and thin, almost 7 feet in height, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Their faces were longer and narrower than human faces, with large dark eyes and no visible hair. Most striking of all were the patterns of light that moved under their skin like slow lightning, changing colors as Jake watched. The lead Veltar official spoke in their musical language, and Amy quickly translated. "He says we are welcome on Veltar Prime, and that Emperor Kethmoran is eager to meet with us." The journey to the palace took them through the alien city in a vehicle that floated silently above the ground. Jake stared out the windows at the strange architecture and the Veltar citizens going about their daily lives. Children played in parks filled with plants that glowed softly in the dim light. Adults moved with a graceful flowing motion that reminded Jake of dancers. "They're beautiful," Dr. Wong whispered. "Look how the light patterns under their skin seem to respond to their emotions. See how the children's patterns are brighter and move faster?" Jake noticed she was right. The young Veltar had rapid, colorful light displays, while the adults showed slower, more subtle patterns. It was like watching a completely different form of communication. The Imperial Palace was even more impressive than the city. It rose from the ground like a mountain made of crystal and metal, reaching high into the cloudy sky. Guards in ceremonial armor stood at attention as their vehicle approached the main entrance. Inside, the palace was filled with artwork and decorations that seemed to tell the story of the Veltar people. Jake saw paintings of great space battles, statues of ancient heroes, and tapestries showing the colonization of distant worlds. Everything reinforced the message that this was a proud and powerful civilization. They were led through long corridors filled with officials and servants, until they reached a massive chamber with a high domed ceiling. At the far end sat Emperor Kethmorin on a throne. It seemed to be carved from a single enormous crystal. He was larger than the other Veltar Jake had seen, with elaborate patterns of gold and silver light moving under his skin. Standing near the throne was a younger Veltar female who Jake assumed must be important royalty. Her light patterns were particularly striking, shifting between deep purple and bright gold. She watched the human delegation with obvious curiosity. "That must be Princess Zarathiel," Dr. Wong whispered, "the Emperor's daughter and heir to the throne." Jake led his team forward, remembering to bow 3 times as they approached the throne. The Emperor watched them with an expression that was impossible to read on his alien features. When they reached the proper distance, Jake waited for the Emperor to speak first, just as Dr. Wong had instructed. Emperor Kethmorin's voice was deep and resonant when he finally addressed them in the Veltar language. Amy translated quickly. "He welcomes us to his world and asks what gifts humanity brings to offer friendship with his people." This was the moment Jake had prepared for. He had memorized the speech in the Veltar language, practicing the difficult pronunciation for weeks. He wanted to show respect by speaking their words rather than relying only on translation. Jake stepped forward and began to speak in careful Veltar. He talked about humanity's desire for peace and cooperation. He described Earth's willingness to share knowledge and technology. He spoke of trade agreements that would benefit both civilizations. Then came the crucial moment. Jake wanted to offer what he thought was a partnership of equals between their 2 species. He had practiced this phrase hundreds of times with Amy and the translation computer. He was confident in the words as he spoke them with careful pronunciation. The reaction was immediate and shocking. Every Veltar in the room went completely silent. The Emperor's light patterns suddenly shifted to bright red and orange. Officials throughout the chamber began whispering frantically to each other. Most surprising of all was Princess Zarathiel's reaction. Her light patterns flashed brilliant white, and she stepped forward with her large eyes wide in amazement. "You're taking me as your bride? Really?" she exclaimed in heavily accented but understandable English. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. "I'm sorry, what did I just say?" Dr. Wong was already pulling out her tablet, fingers flying as she checked the translation databases. Amy was frantically reviewing her language files. Sergeant Taylor just stood there looking confused, but ready for trouble. The Emperor rose from his throne, and his voice filled the chamber when he spoke. Amy translated with a shaking voice. "He says that by the ancient laws of the Veltar, you have formally requested the hand of Princess Zarathiel in marriage. This is a sacred ritual that cannot be taken back." Jake's mind raced as he tried to understand what had gone wrong. He looked at Princess Zarathiel, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and what might have been amusement. Her light patterns were shifting through colors he had never seen before. "Captain," Dr. Wong said quietly, "I think there might have been an error in our translation files. The phrase you used appears to be part of an ancient marriage proposal ceremony." The Emperor continued speaking, and Amy translated with growing alarm. "He says that to refuse this proposal now would be a grave insult to the royal family and could be considered an act of war. However, by Veltar law, you must prove your worthiness through trials of combat, wisdom, and sacrifice." Jake looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces watching him. Some looked angry, others curious, and a few seemed almost entertained by the situation. He realized that in trying to establish peaceful relations with the Veltar Empire, he had accidentally proposed marriage to their princess. Princess Zarathiel stepped closer, and Jake could see intelligence and humor in her large, dark eyes. "Well, Captain Morrison," she said in her accented English, "this is certainly not how I expected to choose a husband. But if you are serious about this proposal, You will need to compete against my other suitors." She gestured toward a group of male Veltar standing near the wall. One of them, taller and more heavily built than the others, stepped forward. His light patterns showed aggressive red and orange colors. "That is General Vex Star," the princess explained. "He has been seeking my hand for 3 years. He will not be pleased to have competition, especially from an alien." Jake looked at his small team, then back at the Emperor and Princess. He realized there was no way out of this situation that wouldn't result in disaster for Earth. The Veltar clearly took their marriage customs very seriously, and insulting the royal family could indeed lead to war. "Your Majesty," Jake said, bowing again, "I accept the challenge and will compete in whatever trials you require." The Redemption dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the asteroid field, its sensors immediately detecting the massive bulk of the Wandering Hope drifting helplessly among the rocky debris. The refugee ship was even larger than Jake had expected, easily 3 times the size of his salvage vessel, but its engines were completely dark, and sections of its hull showed the telltale signs of critical system failures. Jake studied the tactical display while Zarakith worked at the communication station, trying to establish contact with the stranded vessel. The asteroid field created natural interference that would help hide them from hegemony sensors, but it also made navigation extremely dangerous. Chunks of rock the size of small buildings drifted through space in unpredictable patterns, any one of which could destroy their ship if they collided at high speed. "I'm getting a response," Zarakith announced, her 4 hands operating different communication systems to filter out the interference. "The Wandering Hope is confirming they have 2,300 refugees aboard, including over 600 children. Their main engines are completely offline, and they estimate life support will fail within 8 hours." Vex looked up from his sensor station with concern. "Vex is detecting hegemony patrol signatures at the edge of scanning. Range, at least 3 ships, possibly more. They're conducting a standard search pattern, but they'll reach this sector within 2 hours." Jake felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. 2 hours to evacuate over 2,000 people while avoiding detection by enemy forces and navigating through a deadly obstacle course of floating rocks. It should have been impossible, but Jake had learned over the years that impossible just meant you had to think differently about the problem. "Vos, I need you to calculate the most efficient docking approach that keeps us hidden behind the larger asteroids," Jake ordered. "Kess, start modifying our cargo bays for maximum passenger capacity. Drac, prepare the defensive systems, but keep them powered down until I give the word." Zarakith continued coordinating with the refugee ship while simultaneously monitoring their surroundings for threats and tracking the positions of nearby asteroids. Her ability to handle multiple complex tasks at once made her invaluable during crisis situations like this, when every second counted and there was no room for mistakes. The docking process took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering through the asteroid field. Jake piloted the Redemption with skills learned from years of dangerous salvage operations, threading the ship between massive chunks of rock while Voss called out course corrections and collision warnings. When they finally connected with the Wandering Hope's emergency docking port, everyone aboard both ships breathed a collective sigh of relief that the evacuation began immediately. Jake had organized his crew into teams, with each person responsible for specific aspects of the operation. Zarakith took charge of coordinating the refugee boarding process, using her knowledge of Velaryon psychology to help calm frightened families and organize efficient movement through the ship's corridors. Refugees were in worse condition than anyone had expected. Months of traveling in an overcrowded ship with limited supplies had left many of them weak and malnourished. Children cried as they were separated from their belongings, and elderly Velaryons needed assistance walking through the connecting passages between ships. Kira proved unexpectedly helpful during the evacuation. Despite being only 6 years old, she could speak both Velaryon and Galactic Standard fluently, making her an ideal translator for the younger refugee children who were too frightened to understand what was happening. She moved through the crowds, with her mother offering comfort and reassurance to families who had lost everything. "Mama, there are so many of them," Kira whispered as they helped a family with 4 small children find space in one of the converted cargo bays. "Yes, little star," Zarakith replied, while simultaneously directing traffic flow and monitoring evacuation progress on her portable scanner. "But remember how scared we were when we had nowhere to go? Now we get to help other families feel safe." Again, after 90 minutes of continuous work, they had successfully transferred 1,800 refugees to the Redemption. The ship was packed far beyond its normal capacity, with people occupying every available space, including corridors, storage areas, and even the engine compartments. But there were still over 500 people aboard the Wandering Hope, and time was running out. "Hegemony patrol ships have changed course," Vex announced from the bridge. "They're heading directly toward our position. Estimated arrival time is 15 minutes. Jake made a quick decision that would define everything that happened next. Instead of abandoning the remaining refugees to save those already aboard, he ordered the crew to begin emergency modifications to their ship's internal structure. Using cutting tools and portable barriers, they created additional passenger space by removing non-essential equipment and consolidating systems. Zarakith, Zashi. Four-armed coordination became crucial during this phase of the operation. She simultaneously operated cutting equipment, directed refugee movements, monitored life support systems to ensure they could handle the increased population, and maintained communication with both ships to track their progress with 5 minutes. Remaining before the Hegemony ships arrived, the last group of refugees was transferred to the Redemption. Jake immediately began emergency undocking procedures, while Voss calculated an escape route through the asteroid field that would keep them hidden from enemy sensors. The Hegemony patrol ships arrived just as the Redemption completed its turn. Away from the Wandering Hope, Jake watched on his sensors as the enemy vessels surrounded the now empty refugee ship, their powerful scanners searching for signs of life. When they found none, the lead Hegemony ship fired a single torpedo that completely destroyed the Wandering Hope, eliminating any evidence that a rescue had taken place. The escape through the asteroid field required every bit of piloting skill that Jake possessed. With the ship overloaded and maneuvering systems strained beyond their limits, he guided them through a maze of floating rocks, while Hegemony ships searched the area behind them. Several times they came within meters of collision, but Jake's experience with dangerous salvage operations allowed him to find passages that seemed impossible to navigate. 3 hours later, they reached the safety of neutral space and began the process of distributing the refugees to various settlement worlds and refugee assistance organizations. The rescue had been successful, but more importantly, it had demonstrated something significant about the power of cooperation between different species. Of the rescue spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Within days, Jake began receiving messages from other ship captains who wanted to join his operation, inspired by the example of a crew that put moral principles above profit and safety. Corporate executives offered massive contracts for legitimate rescue and recovery services, recognizing that Sullivan Salvage had developed capabilities that no other organization possessed. 6 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of a much larger ship, watching as his expanded crew conducted a rescue operation for miners trapped on a collapsing asteroid station. Zarakith had become his full partner in the business, her natural leadership abilities and technical skills making her invaluable in coordinating complex operations. The crew now included dozens of beings from various species, all united by Jake's simple philosophy of judging people by their character rather than their backgrounds. Kira, now 7 years old and fluent in 8 languages, served as the ship's unofficial cultural liaison, helping new crew members adapt to their diverse working environment. As Jake watched his people work together to save lives that other organizations had written off as too expensive or too dangerous to rescue, he reflected on how much had changed since that day when a desperate Valarian mother had walked into his workshop looking for work. "Thank you," Zarek said, joining him at the observation window. Jake smiled as he watched their crew successfully extract the last group of trapped miners. "For what?" "For giving us a chance when no one else would," she replied. "And for showing us what family really means." Jake nodded, understanding that their success came not from superior technology or greater resources, but from the simple human belief that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth, regardless of where they came from or what difficulties they faced.